There's a version of you that you don't show anyone, the angry version, the jealous version, the one that wants revenge, wants control, wants things you're embarrassed to admit out loud. Most men spend their whole life trying to bury that version. That's the mistake. That part of you isn't a defect. It's a source of information you've been ignoring. Today I'm breaking down what psychologists call the shadow self, the traits you suppress, and why learning to face it instead of hiding it is one of the most underrated tools for becoming genuinely strong. The shadow isn't some rare dark thing only bad people carry. Every single person has traits they've learned to hide because somewhere along the way, showing them got punished, ignored, or judged. Anger got you labeled difficult. Ambition got you called selfish, so you buried it instead of learning to use it. The problem isn't that this side exists, the problem is pretending it doesn't. Men who deny their own anger end up exploding at the wrong moments. Men who deny their own jealousy end up sabotaging people quietly instead of dealing with it directly. What you don't examine, you don't control. It controls you instead, just from underground. You don't need therapy to start this work, you need to pay attention. The things that trigger a disproportionate reaction in you are pointing directly at something unresolved. If a coworker taking credit for your work sends you into a rage that feels bigger than the situation, that's not really about the coworker. That's an old wound about not being seen or valued getting touched again. Start tracking your overreactions instead of judging them. What did that comment actually touch? What does this jealousy say about where you feel behind? These aren't feelings to suppress, they're a diagnostic tool nobody taught you how to read. Here's what happens when you refuse to acknowledge a trait instead of managing it. It doesn't disappear, it leaks out somewhere else, usually somewhere worse. Men who suppress anger often become passive-aggressive instead of direct. Men who suppress ambition often become quietly resentful of anyone who succeeds instead of chasing their own goals. Men who suppress their need for control often become controlling in relationships without realizing it. The trait was never the enemy, the refusal to acknowledge it was. A man who knows he has a temper can build systems around it, walk away before it hits, choose his words with intention. A man who denies he has one gets blindsided by it every single time. Nearly every trait you're ashamed of has a version of itself that's actually useful. Aggression, properly directed, becomes assertiveness that protects your boundaries. Jealousy, properly examined, becomes clarity about what you actually want but haven't pursued yet. Ruthlessness, properly controlled, becomes decisiveness that doesn't get manipulated by guilt. The trait isn't good or bad on its own, it's the direction and control that decide that. This is the actual work, not eliminating these traits, but learning to point them somewhere useful instead of somewhere destructive. Most men skip this step entirely. They either suppress the trait completely or let it run wild. Both versions keep you weak. Directed intensity is what actually builds strength. You cannot integrate a part of yourself you're still performing around. If you're constantly managing how others see you, staying agreeable, staying likable, avoiding anything that might make someone think less of you, you'll never get honest enough with yourself to look at what's underneath. This doesn't mean announcing every dark thought to everyone around you. It means being honest with yourself first, in private, without an audience. Ask yourself the uncomfortable question and actually sit with the answer instead of rushing to explain it away. Most men never do this because it's genuinely uncomfortable to admit you're capable of pettiness, cruelty, or weakness. But you already are capable of those things, whether you admit it or not. Admitting it is what gives you control over it. There's a difference between facing your shadow and giving it the wheel. Facing it means acknowledging the anger, understanding where it comes from, and choosing how to respond. Indulging it means using that anger as an excuse to act however you want and calling it being real. This distinction matters because some men use shadow work as permission to be cruel, dismissive, or reckless and call it authenticity. That's not integration, that's just impulsiveness with a philosophical label on it. Real integration means the trait is now available to you as a tool, used deliberately, not a force running the show while you make excuses for it. The parts of yourself you've spent years trying to bury aren't going away. They're not weaknesses to eliminate, they're raw material you haven't learned to use yet. A man who's made peace with his own capacity for anger, jealousy, and ruthlessness isn't more dangerous, he's more stable, because nothing about himself catches him off guard anymore. Stop performing the version of yourself you think people want to see. Start getting honest with the version that's actually there. That's where real strength starts, not in pretending the dark side doesn't exist, but in finally deciding what to do with it.